Okay. Hello, everyone. This is yet another episode of Sunday webinars by Welcome Solutions. In these webinars, we chat with PhDs and other professionals who built interesting careers and made some bold career moves in the process. And today, I have a great pleasure to host Dr. Parag Mahanti, whose bio is very long, so I will need to be brief here. And Parag is a life science professional with experience in life sciences strategy consulting, biotech valuations, and pharmaceutical access and commercialization strategy. Parag received his PhD in chemistry and chemical biology in 2013 from Cornell University, where his research was focused on nuclear hormone receptors, steroid signaling, and metabolomics. Sorry, I'm not a biologist. He then transitioned to a career in management consulting, and he was working for IMS Health Consulting Group, Barclays, and Novartis, where he's currently a director of US market access business planning. He's also involved in other projects as a volunteer. He collaborated with USA-India Chamber of Commerce to organize the annual Biopharma and Healthcare Summit at Cambridge, MA. And he also serves as a mentor for the Entrepreneurship Lab launched by the New York City Economic Development Corporation to provide mentorship to biotech and health tech startups. He also created the Ph.D. Career Networking Group on LinkedIn, a fast-growing group to foster career development of PhDs and graduate students, which currently has over 4,000 members. Now I'd like to give the floor to Parag. We are very curious about your story as seen from your point of view, and especially about why you took your decision to move to industry and what prompted you to now be involved in helping PhDs in building their careers. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Awesome. First of all, thank you, Natalia, for the invitation. This is it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad that I can share my story. Hopefully some people will find benefit in it, but it's always good to chat. So I think you asked a few questions there. First was my story. Second, how did I transition? And third, how did I come up, or why did I create a group? So I'll start with the story part. I am from India, where I grew up, did my undergrad. I come from a part of India, and India in general over indexes in academics. Like, we are told from the beginning, if you don't study, then your life is pretty much, useless. You should be focusing on academics. And even within academics, the part of the country that I come from, pretty much unanimously believes that studying science, and now it has changed to engineering and medicine, but basically if you don't study science, somehow your life is not complete. A thought that I don't believe in, but it was what I grew up with. And in fact, I wanted to study English as literature. Like, I wanted to be a writer at some point, but it never, all those dreams got squashed because my parents and the surrounding family, everybody was a chemist. Everybody pursued chemistry. And so it was obvious that I was going to study chemistry as well. So I studied chemistry for about 5 years in India, 3 years of bachelor's, 2 years of master's. And then I decided to come for a PhD to the US, which is where I am now. I came here in 2008. As you mentioned, my PhD was in chemistry and chemical biology. Specifically, I was working with worms, and I was a chemist by training. Essentially, my professor, who's a leader in the specific analytical tool that we use called NMR spectroscopy, was looking at chemical signaling through NMR spectroscopy. That was our job. And very simply put, and this is how I explain my research when I am ever asked that in interviews, is imagine there's a group of people and you take a photograph, and then you ask people who are wearing blue, so you and me say, to get away from the photograph and then take a picture again. Now, if you give that both of those pictures to somebody else and try to compare them, they will immediately see that the signal that was given was remove blue people, right? And that's basically what we do. We take snapshots of chemical signals at different parts of a biochemical pathway and then compare what is missing and what is not. And that kind of gives us an idea of what genes created what molecules.
Can I have a comment? Actually, if you gave me a photo and asked me what was actually done to the photo and that was removing blue dressed people, I would never ever guess. So, yeah, that's
It
for the
is
records, you know?
it is actually much simpler than that. It's almost you overlay two pictures and you see certain dots missing. And then you realize, oh, that is missing because you created a mutant. And so now you know that because of that gene, this molecule was being created. So it's something as simple as that. I need to work on that analogy now because I think I made it more complicated. Anyway, so I did that for my entire PhD, and it was super interesting. I loved the work. I loved solving puzzles as they were. But somewhere around third or fourth year, I realized that on a long-term career perspective, this is not what I wanted to do. And multiple reasons came through that. Kind of just in general, realizing that I loved science, but the amount of time I had to wait for the work that I was doing to actually impact people was going to be a long wait, made me realize that I wanted something that where I could see my work having an impact faster. And that's what started me kind of thinking, all right, if I want, I can do a postdoc, but what else is out there? And that's when I started speaking to people. And uh, it was just out of sheer frustration, I think, because everybody around me were all like, "Oh, we are going to finish PhD and get a pharma R&D job or go and do a postdoc," whereas I did not want to do either of those two at that time. And so I was like, "What else can I do?" And so I started talking to people, mostly folks outside of chemistry and biology, because the engineering folks, they know a lot more about consulting and other things that are out there, just because, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because they're closer to the industry, but that's what I realized, at least in Cornell. And so that's when I came to know about this thing called consulting or strategy consulting. I mean, I knew the companies, McKinsey, BCG, I didn't know what they did, but it is only then I realized, this is something that I'm interested in. These are smart people solving problems in a team. That is exactly what I want to do. And so then I joined the Cornell Consulting Club, and that's when I realized, okay, consulting is what I wanted to do. So I interviewed with all of the big firms. The firm that I ultimately chose to join was a healthcare specific firm called IMS Health, which is now called IQVIA. And then, I mean, we can go into details about the interview process, but at the point, I'm just going to tell you what happened after that. Within consulting, I gained a whole bunch of skills, many of which are pretty much very much at par to an MBA. Because you know how to lead people, you know how to manage people, both, you manage clients, you manage internal stakeholders, you manage content, you definitely manage time. And all of those things, even if you do them during PhD, nobody really tells us that they are skills. And suddenly you realize, oh, these are actually skills that you are being measured upon, which is one of the things that we as PhDs need to be told very early on, is that everything that you're doing, managing resources, managing people, managing time, are skills that can be quantitatively estimated. We don't do it just because it's part of our lives, right? So consulting was very eye-opening. It was immensely enriching in terms of gaining skills that I still use. Um, Not just PowerPoint or Excel modeling skills, but in general, how do you continue a group conversation? How do you run a brainstorming session? So I did that for about 2.5 years. And then around that time, I realized I was missing science, which is when I kind of was like, okay, what else can I do? And an inbound recruiter essentially reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to do equity research? And I tried to kind of find out what equity research was. And when I met the next manager who I ultimately worked for next, um, I realized, wow, this is something super interesting because she was focusing on gene therapy and gene editing and cell therapy. All of those things were super interesting. Just for those who don't know what equity research is, it's basically you're following specific stocks. In my case, it was biotech companies, and you're trying to understand what is the science good enough? And does the science translate to the value that the company is saying that they're worth? So every stock has a value. Do you know how to connect the pipeline that a company has to the value that they're saying? And so in that connection, you need to understand what's the market size of that product? Are there other competitors? So competitive intelligence is a big deal in equity research. What does the market think? Because the product and the market might be great, but sorry, you have a question, Natalia.
I have a question. Actually, I have a little thing. If I'm correct, this is also a type of analysis that is often referred to as a fundamental analysis. Am I correct?
That is absolutely correct. So there are two types of analysis that happens with stock. One is called fundamental analysis, the other is technical analysis. And so technicals are basically looking at just how the stock is moving, not necessarily how the company and what the pipeline is and so on and so forth. They're just they're making assumptions on a quantitative basis of, hey, the stock has been up for n number of days and it's reaching this ratio between its 12-month high and 6-month low. I'm making things up here, but that's what is more technical, and we didn't do that. We went most equity analysts, most equity research analysts within biotech are focusing on fundamental analysis of the stock. And so I did that for 2.5 years. That was, again, extremely, in consulting and in general, any of these service jobs, we use a term, a jargon called drinking from the fire hose. And it was that, where basically there was a lot of information thrown at you, and you just had to catch, interpret, assimilate, and then kind of remember all of that. And so it was super enriching. The work-life balance was different because when you're doing equity research, your day starts around 7 a.m. and it can end whenever. That depends on the team. That depends on what you're working on, how dynamic that industry is. Small and mid cap biotech, which is my industry, was super dynamic, and people were always asking questions. We were always creating content. So on an average, I was working at least 13, 14 hours a day for sure, and often it went much higher than that. And so um, the, uh, the biggest, I would say, kind of realization from that was, hey, this is awesome. I really love doing this, but can I do this sustainably, continually, right? And certain other things happened in my personal life that made me realize, no, I cannot. I need to find a place where it's equally um, enriching in terms of intellectual stimulation, but takes a little bit less hours in the day. And that's when I started looking at, hey, what can I do? Can I go into VC or can I go into an industry? And I interviewed at a few places. The Novartis position was the most, I would say, kind of the one that I really wanted because it was strategy with a really good biopharma company. And so right now, what I do is strategy and operations for Novartis, specifically within market access. Market access is basically the part of a pharma company that allows drugs to reach patients, right? So there is a part that does sales, there's a part that does marketing, but there's a part that actually gets the drug to the patients, and there are multiple steps to that. So how do you keep that flowing? What are the strategies associated with it? Is what I do, and it's a combination of skills. It's one part of my understanding of the science It's another part of my understanding within the consulting business. And then, of course, understanding equity research and therefore the biotechnology market, therefore competitive intelligence. All of that relates to the position that I'm now doing. So that's a long answer to my story and where I am. So I'll take a pause. I know there are two other questions you have, but I'll take a pause and I'll see if you have questions, if Anna has any questions, and if anybody else has any questions.
Yeah, just a little comment, guys. If you have questions, please post them in the chat, and we'll take all the questions. Yeah, that's that's a great story so far, Parag. Actually, I usually ask this question in the very end, but I would here. I'm actually tempted to ask you this question in the beginning, and the question is: so how do you see your future? Because I really like the fact that you build up on your previous skills and you integrate your knowledge from all these different disciplines. I think people who have that skill and that general strategy to develop themselves get really far in professional lives. But actually, I'm curious. Do you see yourself? Do you have a vision for yourself in the perspective of 5, 10, 15 years, or is it an open question?
So it's a tough question, right? Because if I go the reason why I say it's tough is because if I look back, um, 7 years back, which is when I finished my PhD, I wasn't thinking I will be in this specific position, right? So I took pivots, and many of those pivots were strategic. Many of those pivots, for example, leaving equity research was personal, right? Because I realized that I had to spend more time at home, and there were things that I couldn't do just by staying at work all of the time. Um, with that caveat, I think I have a 10-15 year plan of doing two things. So on one end, I do want to converge the skills that I have at a senior role in a biopharma company. Um, and when I say senior, I mean, a decision making senior management role. How long that takes, we shall see. And on the other hand, we will talk about this, but the community that I'm building on LinkedIn, I want to see it grow into something where people kind of find it to be, hey, this is something that has been built for PhDs, for both academia, non-academia, STEM, outside of STEM, to kind of discuss and do the stuff that we are doing, right? And all of us are doing this individually. Can we make this bigger? And we can go into that. But those are currently the two kind of ideas I have. Of course, I said 10, 15 years. Now, you can't jump from now until 2030. I mean, nobody really knew 2020 was going to be the way it happened. So one cannot have a crystal ball and say what's going to happen in 10 years. But I can say there are little goals that I want to achieve. At this point, I'm keeping them to myself because, there are little internal goals. But 10, 15 years, that's the vision at this point. I will relate that to the question that you asked. You, the best way to move up is what I have been told, right? I'm still building my career, but what I've been told is get breadth of experience. The depth of my experience was and is understanding science and understanding strategy. Now it's about, do I know all parts of the business, and do I understand all parts, the breadth of the business? And so that's what use that, or anybody who's listening, translate that to whatever you're doing. So if you're applying for jobs after PhD, first get to know what all is there, understand the breadth before realizing that this is what you want to do. Do not make a decision saying, oh, this is the only thing I can do, let me do this, because that kind of, you didn't even know what the breadth was, and you kind of just jumped into something, the only thing that you knew. So I would translate that, but I know that was not the question you were asking. But
Okay, but actually, at this stage, I would like to refer to something that you told me once in private. And it's very interesting concept. So when I talk to PhDs, I often mention that you can't have everything at once. You can't have both safety and stability, and at the same time, a lot of freedom and free hands to do every project you like. At least not at the beginning. But I remember you have also a very nice point of view at the trade-off you have to make when you go to industry. So could you please share with us?
right, I don't know, and therefore I will not claim that this is my invention. And I will become a little nerdy about this. And so anybody who's listening to this and has background in physical chemistry will understand a three-component phase diagram. And if you give me 1 minute, I'll very quickly explain. A three-component phase diagram is a triangle. And so if you think about it, it's solid, liquid, and gas on each of the centers. So anything on the side is between a solid and a liquid. Anything on this side is between a liquid and a gas. Anything on this side is between a solid and a gas. So sublimation, for example, when you convert something from solid to gas, is this. So if you are on one side of the triangle, you have ignored the other two things. And if you're on one side, then you have ignored that other one point. That's where this thought came up. I think work-life balance, compensation, and intellectual stimulation are three parts of this phase diagram. So if you want intellectual stimulation and you want it to be paid highly, you need to compromise on your work-life balance. Now, if you don't have to, I'm not saying that it's impossible. Absolutely not. Like, trust me, I've been in situations where I've been in days, I wouldn't say extended periods, but I've been in specific situations where I've thought, oh wow, this is really great. I love doing this. I'm getting paid well, and I have a great work-life balance. In fact, to be very honest, and without saying this just because I work at Novartis now, I do think I feel that much more often now in Novartis than in any of my previous jobs. But that being said, if you think about it, there are often times you will be paid a lot of money and you will get a lot of time to do whatever you want, but you will realize that, oh my God, this is so boring. As opposed to there will be times when you'll be, super great work-life balance and you're doing a lot of great thinking, but you're not being compensated. And if I may say so, a lot of academic jobs are like that, where it's extremely intellectually stimulating. You have the control of your own work-life balance, and yet academia doesn't always pay amazing salaries, right? Compared to what you would see in a consulting job or in a post MBA job. So if that's what you were referring to, I think that's the balance that I keep telling folks, that you cannot have, or at least you shouldn't start thinking that you will have all three. You will reach to a point of all three, but it will take time. It won't happen right up front. So decide after your PhD or postdoc, what is it that you want to focus on and what is it that you can compromise. And then now I've been told by leaders that I speak with and my mentors, within the work-life balance. So I'm changing this theory, if you can call it. Within work-life balance, I think now they're putting things in my mind. They're saying geographical location is another part, right? So oftentimes you'll get all three, but you have to move from where you are, right? So are you willing to move? So that's the other thing that people often throw in the mix. But anyway, this is something that I think, I mean, I use it that, all right, I get two of these, I'm great. And
Yeah, it's great insight, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's a very good way of explaining the dilemma that you have to face after you leave academia, and even in academia, of course. Actually, I also agree with you that it's possible to get the balance between the three, but it always takes time. And like, to me, it really feels that the best way to be able to reach that homeostasis with like all three of those aspects covered is when you get to certain degree of wealth, because if you have that degree of wealth, that it also gives you a lot of personal freedom, and you can dictate your own conditions in what format and in what form you want to work, and what types of projects you want to focus on, and how much time you're willing to spend. So in the end, that wealth factor is really important. Whenever we actually, as academics, we are taught that it's not, that it's like it's really dirty to talk about wealth. But in fact, I think it's really important aspect that really influences the amount of career opportunities and the quality of your professional life. After all, so I think we will agree here.
No, I totally agree. I will double click on what you said about wealth, right? And I will say that it's wealth of experience also, right? So it's not just financial wealth that that is important, but also if you have a lot of experience, at that time you can dictate things, you can delegate things, you now have a better understanding of where your time is used. So up until that point, when you reach that point, you can do that. But when you're starting off, you should be like, hey, I can only do these three things. You're right. I think that gives you the privilege, wealth of, financial wealth, experience, gives you the privilege to choose certain things. Absolutely.
Hmm. Okay, so maybe let's again comment for the audience. Please ask your questions. Whatever you like to ask, we'll try to respond
Absolutely.
every single question. And I have my next question will be about this initiative that you started, PhD and the PhD networking career networking group. Sorry. So from what I know, you launched this initiative a few years ago, and it's now getting a lot of steam. So congratulations, first of all, and
Thank you.
please tell us a little bit more about the origins of this group. So how did it come to your mind to start this group, and what were the beginnings, and where is this project right now, and maybe a little bit about the plans for the future.
Absolutely. Um, uh, Plans, I don't know how much I can talk about because that's the future. We don't. So, but let me go back to the beginning, right? So remember, I just a few minutes back I said, "Oh, I did this, and I went and joined a consulting club." It sounds, and it's very funny. I was having a conversation similar with somebody else, and it was funny that how all of this sounds linear now, at hindsight, but it was never linear. It was when I was realizing that I wanted to do consulting. It was a lot of learnings and a lot of frustrations, a lot of failures, an immense number of failures to understand. But a quick anecdote, right? The very first time I actually went into a consulting interview, after interviewing me, and it was for an internship, not even a full job. After interviewing me for 40 minutes, I asked them for, hey, how was the interview and how was the feedback? And that person was like, have you heard of this book? I think you should read it. Basically, he was implicitly saying that you have no idea about consulting, right? And so he asked me to go back and read this like really boring book about consulting. Back then, uh, I'm not gonna promote any book here, but it was not the greatest book either. And I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what consulting is. And yet I did manage to crack some of the tougher interviews of the top firms. Um, so that time made me realize that there was no resource or very limited resource. I shouldn't say no, because I've been told by many people that no, there are resources. Yes, there are resources, as you yourself are building, Natalia, you will know. Um, there are resources, but forget now, even now, there is a lot less focus on telling folks in universities who are in grad programs, whether they are masters or they have already started their PhD degrees. There is no concerted effort to let people know what they can do afterwards. And some universities are doing it, so it's always starting from, the best universities are probably doing it, and then it slowly comes down when it becomes a norm. Some outliers, universities that don't always are considered to be great ranked but are also doing great stuff on this, are also doing this. But it's mostly individuals and few groups here and there that are doing this. And now if you reverse to 2013, not many people were doing it anyway. And so every time I picked up, the phone, or I emailed somebody and I asked a question because somebody else told me to ask a question, I was like, hey, this didn't come naturally to me to ask a question. Other people, and I knew everybody in my friend circle who were all PhDs, they were all asking me questions. So that came to the conclusion that, hey, we need a platform. And in fact, back in the day in 2012 and 2013, I started a blog which did not go anywhere, but I called it Academic Inertia because I thought it was the inertia that was stopping us of like, hey, I know academia, I know research, let me do more research. And people weren't looking at what else they could do. And then I was told very politely by one of my very close friends, who's, by the way, it's his birthday today, and you have seen him on the network, Anupam. And Anupam was like, dude, academic inertia sounds negative. And by the way, he continues to be in academia and he loves it. That's his passion. And then I realized, hey, it's not bad to continue in academia if you can. So what is missing is basically an input of information telling people how to manage their career. And that's what was missing. And so I started understanding, how can we do this? I ran a survey within my friends, like, what kind of information do you want to do? And that's when I got the job, my first consulting job, and I moved to New York. And that's when I met a couple of folks who were trying to build something like this on Facebook. And so with them, I built what has grown immensely now, a network of peers, primarily focused on Indian PhD students. And so that's when I realized, this is on Facebook. We need something on LinkedIn. And so I built this group back then. But nobody really kind of, nobody around within that circle was focusing on LinkedIn. I wasn't, because I was doing consulting. And after consulting, I did finance. Both of them were extremely taxing jobs in terms of, you couldn't really spend a lot of time. So finally, when I had a little bit of time last Christmas, I realized, I want to channel more energy into this. And the group around that time didn't even have maybe just about 500, 600 members last December. And so I started working on it. I started contacting folks that I knew, and I started getting people who already had jobs, um, people who already had an idea about the transition. Because if you want advice, these are the people that you would go to. More importantly, I am at a different part of my career now than when I was 5 years back. And I'm also trying to increase my network and understand am I wrong in certain biases? What am I thinking that is wrong? So all of that led me to kind of fill the group with a bunch of folks that have already done a lot of work in this, including yourself. And then kind of the group kicked off. I think, like any other group that has a the mission of the group is very simple: help PhDs in their career progression. Now, when I say it that way, it sounds dry, because career progression is all about, resume, cover letter, interviews, networking. and especially academics and PhDs in general, we have a repulsion against the word networking. Like I did too. I'm an extrovert, but therefore I could manage somehow. But I know everybody around me don't like the word networking. But my thought and the group that we have now there, our thought is, and I know you resonate with this, is basically make networking a simpler process because it's not rocket science. You're only talking to somebody about something that they do. And we know when people are asked about what they do, they will tell you. So the barrier isn't about whether people will tell you or not. The barrier is, will you ask them, number one, and where will you find those people? So this group answers the second question first, which is, hey, let's bring a whole bunch of folks that have done careers outside of PhD and let's just keep them, and hopefully there will be organic conversation. And now I think to now your question of what's the plan. Now the plan is, how can you make those conversations happen? Because you can bring as many people, but if people are still not crossing that barrier, those conversations would never happen. So how do you actually bring folks and start kind of, hey, you're interested in, I remember there are two examples from the group. There was somebody who asked about UX or user experience and what to do. And it took me about 30 minutes, 45 minutes to go through the group and understand who were there who did UX and just tag them in the comment to her post. And then suddenly two of them who are experienced UX researchers comes there and then gives comments on, hey, this is what you should do. That's one example, right? The second example is equity research. Somebody had a question on equity research, and I wrote a post and I tagged a whole bunch of folks who are also in the group. And then some of them started commenting on there. So it's a simple concept. Get people who know about careers, and it doesn't have to be academic non-academic careers. It can be both academic and non-academic, which is why, as I said, my friend Anupam, he is an academician himself. He's focusing on a career within academia, so he's looking at it from that lens. I'm looking at it from what can you do after PhD? You can do consulting and equity research. There are other folks in that team who are biotech specialists who have done R&D. And then in the group, there are friends like yourself. You are doing something very, you did a PhD and then you started a community of yourself where you're kind of giving your experience and providing a value to people who need that, who need to shape their career, right? So there are a lot of fundamentally amazing people in that group that people should just be reaching out and finding their stories, right? So that's the story of the group.
Okay,
And
great.
if you haven't joined, please join. Natalia's gonna contact me, contact Natalia. Natalia's gonna that's my plug.
Yes, that was exactly what I was going to say. There will be a link in the description so that if you guys still didn't join the group, please do so. It's I can confirm it's an amazing group, very very supportive and very vivid as well, and a lot of interesting, useful information. So and very friendly atmosphere because hey, Parag is the father of the initiative, so of course it's very good spirit around it. So yes, please guys check it out for sure. The 100%, yeah, that's obligatory. I mean, that's what I meant. Obligatory after watching this movie. Please check out the group. Yes, and I have to say that I really admire your perseverance because as you were saying, it looked like the dynamic was pretty flat for a long time. So not much movement for a long time, and I really like the fact that you also pivoted. So you try to find the best platform for it. So from the blog, you move to Facebook, and then you move to LinkedIn, and I really like that. I think it's a very entrepreneurial thing to do. And yeah, actually, I myself also work on this perseverance right now, and I can see that in many of these types of initiatives, dynamics is the exponential indeed, that for a long time there is like no movement, and then you have to survive through that period and keep on going and keep your vision alive, and then at some point you will be noticed and your initiative will get noticed, but you have to go through that period first. And actually recently I was for the first time in 14 years, ever since I started blogging, I was invited to give a public talk about blogging. And that was super surprising, because and I was actually thinking of quitting at this point. I was like,
Oh, wow.
I don't have any income from this. The audience is like growing too slow. I don't really feel this is a good way of spending my time. I love writing, but I don't really feel that this is the best way of allocating my time right now. And then exactly at that point, the audience started growing. That was exactly almost like week in week when I started having doubts, and that was exactly when it happened. So I can tell that to anyone who has projects like this, like you believe in something, you do it because you love it, and then keep on going, because you never know when you will get through that threshold, and then all of a sudden your initiative starts working. So that's absolutely great that you were so tough and brought it to where it is now. And now I would like to ask you something. And another comment I have is about the way this career advisory is being approached right now. So in 2013, indeed, there was almost no public resources on career advisory for PhDs. Now I think most universities, at least here in Europe, they take it seriously. They start launching their own career centers and a lot of events for PhDs that are dedicated solely to careers after a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, indeed, my personal belief is that independent people who are in industry already, and they're always, more more unbiased and well informed compared to university employees. I mean, it cannot be any other way. So eventually, the self navigation and mutual help, I believe, is better than going for the standardized ways that universities are approaching the problem right now. So that's also why I really like this initiative, because it's really bottom up, and in my view, it's much more helpful, and I'm sure that the members of the group will agree as well. Okay, do you have something to add here, Parag? Because I thought you were.
No, I think what you said makes total sense. I think there is something to be told about the university, because I've spoken and I'm speaking to many, as you are too, right? And I'm speaking to many folks. Some of them are part of the group who are focusing on career advisory within universities. And I think all of us, or rather, let me put it this way, right? If I start, I mean, I don't do it because I don't see people as customers. But if you think of it as a product, right? If you think career advice as a product, right? So the product itself is the advice. The advice you will get are from people who have done something, right? Who have actually made the transition. And the customer or the consumer of that product are, starting from master students going into PhD, starting from undergrads who are thinking about a PhD, to PhD students, postdocs, as well as folks like us, right, who are in the middle of their careers or have just started their careers. That's the entire kind of supply chain of the product, right? The folks like us and folks like those who are career advisors are facilitators. Now, if we start believing that, and which is sometimes the issue is that sometimes people think, they are, I mean, people feel overwhelmed that, oh my God, I don't know how to help somebody. But that's not like most professors. I know for a fact that many professors think this student that I have is interested in a profession or a career track that I don't know anything about. How can I help? That's where folks like us, groups like ours, should be coming in and saying, you don't have to worry about it. All you need to do is to encourage your students to seek help. We will have a platform that will have people that can help them. But if you think you're the only one who should help, and that's a hero mentality that I think will plague academia if professors keep thinking that they are the only one who will be able to help. Absolutely not. Talk to folks like us, talk to career advisory groups. All you have to do is to encourage students to build their path. If you say, no, academia is the only thing you should do, or no, consulting is the only thing you should do, that itself is like a mistake. Like it just stops there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there's still this winner's curse that sometimes affects professors, unfortunately. Not all of them, of course, but yeah, some professors still believe that if something worked for them, it should work for you. But
Yeah,
unfortunately, this is slowly changing thing mentality.
that is absolutely true. I will come to that because I have some things to share about that. But I just saw a question on the chat. Um,
Shall I read
question
the
from
question? Maybe I
yes.
read the
So
question. Okay. The question is from Anna. Anna is asking, how did you identify mentors outside of academia? I'm sure groups like the one you lead are excellent avenues, but back when the group didn't exist. Very good question.
it's such an excellent question. Thank you, Anna, for asking this because the answer is actually just just simple. You didn't. Finding a mentor is Google searching, right? And um, it has enough element of luck in it as well. So I'll tell you what I did, and this goes with what Natalia just said. What works for me may not work for everybody, right? Because remember, I came from India, so I had certain kind of, I had one group of friend circle, right? And then I was in chemistry and chemical biology, so that also defined my friend circle. Somebody else coming from an engineering background, somebody coming from a sociology background will have very different friend circles. But to answer your direct question, you talk to people as much as possible. How do you talk to people? There are three ways, right? Friends, family, and alumni. That's the first three places where you should be starting. So if you are interested in anything, right? So let me take a step back and in fact kind of share my levels of the journey, right? The first level, I think, is when you don't know about all the options. So that's the time when you should be looking, you should be Google searching, or you should be talking to your career advisor network, or you should be, talking to somebody within networks like Natalia's, networks like the one I'm building, and finding out what all is there that you can do as a PhD. But once you have kind of realized these are the two or three things that I can do, that's when you go to friends, family, and alumni. So you ask your friends, hey, these are the three things that I want to do. Do you guys know anybody? And just let it kind of let them find out. Same thing with family. Remember, I came from India. I mean, my brother stays here, but he was also at that time a PhD student. So he didn't know many folks who would be able to help. So then I started looking at alumni. And I mean, LinkedIn doesn't pay me to say this, but I will say it anyway. LinkedIn is an amazing resource to find mentors because mentors don't start off as mentors. Mentors start off as connections that you continually engage and enrich with. And then you realize, oh, wow, I can continually learn from some person. So many of my mentors don't even know that they are my mentors. They're my peers, but I learn from them. And I'm not going to say who they are because then they would start kind of like feeling weird about it, but they're my friends. But from a distance, I learn, oh, this is how he's shaping. And once in a while, when I'm making a career decision, I'll give them a call and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? So there is an aspect of peer mentoring also. But going back to your original question, Anna, you go into alumni network. I know Cornell had one. Cornell had a good database. Bad template. I think they have changed it now. I don't know. but at that time, searching that template was not the best. But LinkedIn has an amazing search when it comes to searching people. LinkedIn has a really bad search algorithm when it comes to searching content, but searching people is their strength. So you look for a person in consulting who is either part of your undergrad institute or graduate institute or is in the same city as you, and LinkedIn will show like 350 folks. So now you need to look at each of these 350 folks and realize where you can, and you have to do that. It's hard work. You have to do that. Nobody else is going to do it for you. There's um, no easy step when it comes to that, because this is your career. You need to invest time in it, and that's when you will start, emailing them. Now, one thing about emailing or connecting, what we call as cold calling folks, where they don't know you, is remember three things, right? This is what I this is what I do, and therefore this is what I tell folks, that this is what I do. I don't know if it'll work for you, but this is what I do, and it kind of works for me. So it needs to have three sentences, right, or three structures. Who are you? What are you doing? And why are you reaching out to that person? So, hi, my name is Parag, and I'm a PhD in chemistry and chemical biology. I'm interested in consulting. Done. That's what you're interested in. Second, I found your name from the alumni network, and I would really love to learn from you. Done. I'm not even three sentences, basically two sentences. Would you be willing, be polite, but reach out and be very specific of, this is what I want to do. I think your experience is very much valuable, and so on and so forth. As you go up in career, you should also add the word or add the phrase, please let me know if I can help you with something. Because at the very first step of networking is creating value for other people. Like these days, um, I would rather, and Natalia, you probably know this, like I I don't I don't gain or lose anything by connecting two people. In fact, I gain a lot because now those two people know each other and they have now created a network and I'm part of it. So adding value however you can is important, right? So that's number one. Secondly, and this is just now I'm moving away from mentorship and going into networking. If you have an expertise like Natalia does in psychometric analysis or understanding career progression, put it out there. Get it checked, get it reviewed by other folks, get it reviewed by your friends or anybody who has commented it, and put it out there on LinkedIn. Put it out there if you're more savvy on Twitter, and see who's following you. There will be folks who will actually give you advice, and you'll suddenly meet strangers who now have become mentors. And it has happened to me. And so, summarizing, friends and family and alumni are the first step. Move it back to LinkedIn. Create content so that you get more people into you or into your content, and then start chatting with them. Like, I mean, that would be the best way to kind of look for mentors. And one thing I forgot, I was going to say that and then I missed it. Cold calling success rate is about 10%. So if you are sending 100 folks a cold calling email, and even if that email is perfect, you will probably hear back from 10. And that's not because they hate you, or that's not because the email was, if the email was bad, that number might go down to 5 or 1 or 0, right? So the succinctness and the value of that email is super important. But once you have a good email, don't expect too much. If you have 20 people replying to you, amazing. I'm not going to say what number for me was, but I can definitely tell you initially that number for me was 5. Like I sent out a pretty well constructed networking email to hundreds of folks, and maybe 5 replied. And then that started increasing because I realized, oh, I need to make this better. Anna, I can't see you, so I don't know if that answered your question, but that's an excellent question, by the way. Thank you for asking.
And if I could add something, I again, I couldn't agree more with anything you said. If I could add just one comment, then I think it's also good to indeed keep in mind that every company is a little bit different, and every company culture is different. So
Yeah.
if you create these bonds with mentors, it's good to remember that they take a look from their own perspective. So if you have really important decision to make, it's always good to have this broad network of mentors and really think about that situation. Who is the best 5 people or 10 people to approach with this question, and never take advice just from one person, because I was doing this mistake a lot in my 20s. I think I was listening to advice that was too I think my network of mentors was too small, and I was sometimes following an advice of one person, and then it didn't work for me because of this reason that every environment is different. And I think it's good to mitigate that issue by always always awaiting comments and opinions from multiple people that you have respect for as mentors. Okay, so now I have a
I have a question for you, Natalia, because this thing that you just said is amazing, of like having a bigger group of network, and you'll realize why I'm asking the question very soon. So recently somebody asked me, is sending a follow-up email a good idea after an interview, right? Like when you have finished an interview, should you send a follow-up email or not? And if you don't know their email address, should you ask them for it,
Mhm.
right? So let me hear your answer to that
Okay.
first.
Okay, so let me tell you what I know about the differences between different cultures, because then I have to tap into this differences between North American way of doing things in recruitment versus European ways. So in North America, to my knowledge, this is actually a habit that you, after the interview, you are even kind of expected to send a follow-up email to actually politely thank for the interview and express that you are still interested in the job. And this is a common habit. And in Europe, no one ever heard of this. So in Europe, we don't have that tendency to send emails. And if you send that email, like follow-up email, then you will likely be the only one. Well, I hope this is what you meant.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
No, this is
it really
exactly what.
depends on the location to a large extent. Although, actually, I would actually dare to say that, given that in European culture this is not practiced, I think the fact that you will actually send these emails makes you stand out. So if I was applying for a job right now and I was going through the interview, I would probably do it just to make that additional good impression. And I would probably email the recruiter, and if they don't have an email, like I would have to think for a while how to approach this. But I think at least all the jobs I was applying for, there was always the email exchange already before the interview. So I would say that I wouldn't. It would be a weird situation if I don't have an email, at least from the recruiter.
Right.
So I would say whatever email I have, I would send that email to that address. That's my answer.
Perfect. Because the reason why I asked you, right, the forum in which it was asked, I was surprised because some people started saying, "Oh, sending a follow-up email makes you look desperate," and it absolutely doesn't. In fact, a very funny story was that I gave when I was at IMS or IQVIA now, my consulting firm that I worked for, I was doing career talks. And so I went to Cornell to give a talk about IQVIA and how PhDs can transition from PhD to consulting. And that first talk was only to PhDs, right? And then another separate day, I had a similar talk, but now to MBAs. And I'm speaking as a consultant, and I'm talking to a bunch of MBAs about, how how IMS is, how's the company. This will be, I mean, I don't know if you'll be surprised at it or not. Imagine the group size being the same. The number of folks who reached out within 24 hours of me giving that talk was about 95% in the MBA group and was about 5 to 10% in the PhD group. And if that is in any way a metric of understanding what folks do to kind of keep networking going, then that's to me is the answer. Like, you should always be politely thanking people because they took their time and interviewed you, and it doesn't hurt, but it absolutely is not. But anyway, that's an example of, if you only speak to two people and they both think, oh, it's, you know, it's a sign of desperation, then it's a problem. So you need to be expanding the number of folks that you talk to. Another reason why, you know, having a group and asking a question in a group like the LinkedIn group kind of just destroys a lot of these notions, because, you know, there are 5,000 people there who are going to answer.
Right. Yeah. Again, like, it's hard to disagree with you because, yeah, actually everything makes perfect sense, and yeah, it's like it's making this discussion hard, because I usually, you know, the way I do these webinars, I just try to, you know, reach a point where there's some discussion point, you know, so there's some difference in opinions, and it's really hard to disagree with you. So you make it hard for me. But
All right, I'm gonna say all wrong things from now. It's like, don't send any email. In fact, don't apply to jobs at all.
well, now we're talking. Okay, but since you mentioned about MBAs, I was actually going to ask you another question. And since I think we talked about it in the past, and from what I remember, you also have that vision to help PhDs by leading the group on LinkedIn, to help PhDs build this culture of helping each other career-wise after graduation, because this is certainly the case for MBAs. So at least leading universities, they have these alumni circles, and in MBA space, this is very. These are actually going on for a lifetime often, and it's very strong peer support. So could you also talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, it's look, the strong word here is community, um, and the the way people have asked me about, like, you know, why didn't you do an MBA? Initially, it was a silly reason because I thought, oh, I've already done a PhD, I don't need an MBA. And that was an arrogant thought, because, you know, you always learn from new education. But after, you know, spending 2.5 years in consulting, another 2.5 years in finance, and now 2 years in corporate business, um, you start realizing that people value you when they understand your expertise and they gauge your expertise. So if I was talking to, you know, if I was talking to somebody who finished their PhD, who completed their PhD in anthropology. In fact, I was talking to somebody a few weeks back. You know, I know that for the 5 or 6 or 7 years that they have done their PhD, I know the concept of thought, the idea of how they've created a research proposal, then went to understand and test their hypotheses, come back with some form of data or observations, and then written about it in their thesis, because I did the same, right? And that level of understanding is there. Now, I don't know what anthropology is. I like, you know, observing people when I'm at airports, right? But that doesn't mean that, you know, I know anthropology. Like, it's totally different things, right? But I understand the concept of research, and I understand what that person might have gone through for 5 years. Within MBAs or within any other circuit, there is that concept of camaraderie and understanding that, hey, if this person has gone through this degree, then they have gone through a similar set of experiences. Now, the issue with PhDs are, number one, and this was true for me too, so I can say this, but anybody who takes offense at this, please talk to me separately, and I can tell you what I really mean. But PhDs are often arrogant, and they're arrogant about they know best. Whereas 5 years of experience trains you to understand one thing, which is that it took you 5 years to reach where you are. And every year you learn something new. So that means you can continue learning something new. So most PhDs have this, like at least many that I have spoken. I shouldn't say most, that's a wrong, I take that back. Many PhDs have this barrier that, hey, can I actually help somebody? Or can I actually get help from somebody? And that is something that I think is at the crux of, like, how do you change people's psyche to make them realize that here are these thousands of people who will understand what you tell them when you say go and talk to a career counselor, something as simple. Or if you're preparing for R&D jobs, these are the 4 questions that somebody will help you. That kind of a community doesn't exist. What does exist are some communities that will say, if you are part of our community, we will refer you automatically to jobs. I don't see the value in it. I don't think um, you should be doing it just because you have paid membership for a community. You shouldn't be just referring anybody. Talk to that person, build a relationship, and if that person needs to be referred, create one referral. But reining it back, going back to your original question, I think that kind of level of uniformity doesn't exist across uh, subjects. So a chemistry PhD thinks that they cannot relate to an English PhD, which I disagree. Now, of course, there are very big differences between STEM and non-STEM. There are very big differences between people who want to pursue academic careers versus non-academic careers. But at the crux of it, everybody has gone through a period where they disagreed with their bosses and somehow they came to an agreement. Everybody has come to a point where they were working with a junior researcher and that person was slowing the research down, or a collaborator who was not working properly. And these are all things that have happened to all of us. And yet we think, oh no, that person's PhD is in sociology and it's not the same. I don't think so. Yes, I mean, if you ask some of my friends who are in academia or who are in subjects that are non-STEM, will say, no, your experience is very different. Our work, like history or English or anthropology, doesn't often have quantitative inputs, so you can't relate. I agree. I'm not disagreeing to that, but I do think there are common threads where you can match up. Sorry, I keep going on, but
Good, good. Actually, I would like to add a comment, since I believe this is quite interesting phenomenon, given that what I believe is that scientists and researchers are naturally empathic, and many of us go to PhDs in the first place because we want to do projects useful for society, and this is a large part of the motivation. So it's really complex problem how to then let this empathy express. So even if you're born empathic, you still need to have some like helping other people is also a craft, and you also have to work on your ability to do that. And it's all on many levels, also some mental level. And it's
yeah,
interesting that you're saying, because this is not forgiven. You will not be useful for other people just because you were born empathic. You have to actively work on this.
yes. And the other thing also, Natalia, I think is uh, people make the mistake of 2 things when people are helping other people. Um, they either make the mistake that this has worked, as you said this earlier. If this worked for me, it should work for you. Not always. So you should just say, hey, this worked for me. You can also try. And then the second thing is, most people don't understand the questions. So I have often heard, of people saying, hey, I went and spoke to that person, and that person didn't really understand what I told him or her. Maybe the issue is not that person. Maybe the issue is that you didn't simplify what you were saying enough, right? And it happens to me all the time. And I therefore try to simplify as much as I can. Sometimes I cannot, and that's my problem of not being able to simplify something. But telling somebody or giving somebody an advice or just kind of asking folks, hey, do you need like some, another help to your career, or how can I help you, is a question that you should be asking. And one other thing I will say to anybody who's listening to this, um, as a homework, right? For the next week, just find 5 people that you have never met before in your lab or like in your surrounding, and just go and ask them what they're doing with their careers and if you can help them. Just try it and see how it, you might, somebody will like, I don't know you, how can you help me? Try it, even if it is on LinkedIn. Just post, hey, here are the things I can do. How can I help?
Okay, yeah, fantastic advice. So, guys, if you're watching this, please, it's obligatory homework. Take it seriously. Okay, great. And actually, I have a question that just came to my mind once you were speaking about the group and about PhDs helping other PhDs. My question is, to you, to Parag, how like PhD as a concept, as a category, how important part of your mentality is this? When you think about yourself, about Parag,
Yeah,
what comes first, and where is the PhD in the equation?
yeah. This is a philosophical question.
Yeah.
Um, so don't get me wrong. We have been talking for about an hour or so about PhDs, PhDs, PhDs. Does this mean that my definition or who I am is determined by PhD? No. Um, my experience as a person um, is very much shaped from where I grew up. And then I grew up in Calcutta, which is my hometown. And then I went to Delhi in India, which is a very different place for those who know. Um, and then I spent 5 years there. And then after that, I went to Ithaca in New York. By the way, I'm not even kidding, and some of you will call me stupid, but I saw on the Cornell brochure Ithaca, New York, and I was like, oh, this is New York. And when I went, and by the way, Ithaca is 5 hours away from New York City. So when the bus kept going for more than 2 hours, I was like, oh my God, this is not the city. This is a small town, middle of nowhere. That shaped myself. And I come from two very big cities in India, Calcutta and Delhi. So that's who I was, coming from big towns. And I went and spent 5 years at the middle of nowhere. Beautiful town for 4 months of the year, but rest of it is pretty much snow. Um, but I loved it, and it was my first experience of realizing um, what research is, both externally and internally. Like undergrad and masters, you study. Especially in India, you just study. You don't really do much research. I did research internships, but that was just to kind of get to know people, get to know institutes, never really did research. And then you're here for PhD. Your job is research, but suddenly you realize research isn't going to lab and spending time. Research is thinking. And what it taught me was to think about not just my work, but think about myself and think about people. How do I analyze information to come to an hypothesis test the hypotheses, and then come to a conclusion. That process, other people gain through other ways. So I'm not going to say that a PhD was necessary to come to that process. But for me, those 5 years sharpened that skill. That here is data, here are the potential observations and interpretations, here is my hypothesis, and here is how I can. And I can say the same, takeaways from my time at consulting. In consulting, I learned how to break a problem down. In finance, I realized how to translate qualitative information into a probability of success. Because you can learn as much as you can, but finance works with probability of success. So how can you translate it? So there are things that I've learned from differently. So I'm not going to say that who I am is only defined by me as a PhD candidate or a PhD student. Absolutely not. But the part of my life that was what taught me rational thinking and analytical thinking that we always use on resumes. Like, I'm an analytical thinker. Before 2008, Parag was a good enough thinker. After 2013 is when Parag could claim that he was an analytical thinker. Now, I apologize if there are folks that are watching who have not done a PhD. This doesn't mean that you need a PhD to be analytical thinking. Absolutely not. It does not mean that. But for me, that's what it was. I don't know if that answers your question, Natalia.
Yeah, I'm very happy with this answer. Actually, it's a very hard question, but I have a special set for you. I thought like normal questions will not work here because I have a first class specialist here and a very involved person, so I have to actually try with harder questions than usual. So, but I think we are both.
I love the question. I love it.
Okay, great.
I really do.
And I know that we are already over time, but I still would like to ask you something. So if you don't mind, I still have a question for you. And of course, I would also like to encourage the audience. We still have a chance, so take your chance to ask Parag your questions. So my question for now would be, since I myself have a company, I always look at these like little signs of entrepreneurial spirit in other people because I feel there are a lot of uncovered talents among PhDs and people who would be definitely successful company owners. Since you were talking a little bit about your plans for the future, and you mentioned that you're thinking about getting to more senior level of in your current professional career, but at the same time working more on your group, but you didn't really mention about your experience with startup culture, since from what I know, you also had some affairs with the startup culture. And my question would be, aren't you thinking also of starting your business at some point? And the reason I'm asking is because I feel that you come across as very authentic. And I myself, I work a little bit on how in different working environments the so-called star quality differs. So, depending on where you go on the job market, different qualities actually are valued and decide about eventual success. And I think that especially in the startup culture and in entrepreneurship, that feature of being authentic is really crucial. And actually, I have a friend in blockchains that always tells me, you know what, you're so authentic. And I'm like, but what does that mean? Tell me, because I don't even know what the definition is. And he's like, yeah, you're so authentic. And I feel that this is true, actually, although it's hard to define. This is indeed something that always comes across when entrepreneurs speak, especially those that really got somewhere. And I have that feeling when I speak to you. So my question would be, have you ever thought about one day starting your own business as well?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Now I see, Natalia, you are asking the tough questions, and I'm glad. No, the short answer is yes. The long answer of why it hasn't happened is a mixture of And is a mixture of things that I believe are my shortcomings. I believe that there are things that I don't do well, which is why I haven't started something. So, for example, one of the main reasons, of course, is I'm right now in the U.S. and I still don't have my green card. So immigration is a big issue when it comes to like starting up something. But then, other than that, I one of the things that I tell myself that I still have to kind of um, I have shed it about 80%, but I still have about 20% of this academic mentality of perfecting something till it is ready to launch, right? So when you ask about startup culture, I'm very in fact, when you mentioned my bio, you read that I am a mentor for eLab NYC, and I love doing it because I can provide the gaps of knowledge that folks that are entrepreneurial can take it and then do it themselves. Um, by myself, there are ideas that I'm working with and working in, the LinkedIn group being one example, where I'm always thinking I want to take it to a certain level and then I will go into a startup culture, right? So that's kind of, I don't know if that perfectly answers, but the other part, other than laziness, of course, there's also a bit of laziness in it, right? And I know that entrepreneurs cannot be lazy, and I'm not saying that I am lazy. In fact, I'm not.
Actually, I
um,
thought that Indian people cannot be lazy in the first place.
I don't know about that. I think you should talk to my wife about me being lazy. I think that's a better way to answer that. But but I think the other part of it is I'm very uh, curious and focused on leadership and followership, and building something like a company to me is all about people, and it's less about. It is about the product, don't get me wrong. It is about what you are building, the product, the service, absolutely. But it is about the people as well. And I want to work with folks that feel passionate about something as much as I do. And so when you say starting a startup, I have ideas. I've not taken them ideas into some place because I haven't met the right people yet. Right. So I would kind of say that as like it's a bad answer because
No,
you know
I think it's a very good answer. It's a very good answer because one of the main reasons for startups failing is actually conflicts or disagreements between the founders. And sometimes these disagreements they come out after like literally years of working together. And I think, it's the same as, yeah, it's like finding a company with someone is like marriage. It really is, and it consumes to your life to similar extent, so you have to be sure. And that's also one of the reasons why I started my company as a sole proprietorship, and I'm only planning to extend the company to a startup, regular limited company, after I meet the right people. So it's exactly, I totally see your concerns, and I think it's very wise of you that you're actually waiting for the right people, and totally I'm on the same page here. So
yeah, the philosophy there also is that how will you find new people if you don't pitch your idea? I agree. And that's where me kind of like talking to a bunch of folks helps. Like I wouldn't know about your company and I wouldn't be able to provide value to your company unless I met you, right? So that's where kind of opening up the network and talking to as many people as possible helps. But yes, I mean, going back to your original question, am I interested in a startup? Absolutely. Are there ideas that I'm interested in? Definitely. But I think it's got to be with folks that I feel strongly with, right? So if somebody, I mean, it has to be a different level where, and the reason why I say that is because startup requires a lot of what is called intrinsic motivation, right? If you don't have intrinsic motivation, you don't spend late nights. I'm not saying you have to spend late nights, but there are certain times you need to work beyond hours just because you're passionate about it. Now, if you're the only one who's working in a group of three beyond, and then they automatically you feel kind of like, oh my God, like these guys have the same, they are working with my dream or a dream, but they don't think it the same way. And I don't want to feel like that with friends or people. So um, it's tough, and I think it's there's no right way to find the right people. Um, but we'll see. We'll come
Well,
back to this.
we succeed. You succeeded with your marriage, so let's be hopeful that you will succeed again. I want to see that happening, so I will be definitely tracking what you're doing next, and I wish
Thank
you
you,
luck.
Natalia.
And actually, I have one last question from my side, and I'm still waiting for the audience. Like you can still ask your questions. So I have one last question. So I told you that the set is special, so I won't ask you anything that I usually ask people, like their regrets and things like that, because I think that questions are too easy for you. So let me ask you this one. I'm actually thinking a lot these days about this magic age of 30 when
Uh-huh.
many people, when they cross 30, they all of a sudden start like settling, not to say aging, they really want to find a safe place. I see that happening a lot, that they want to be certain of things, and they want to know what their place in the world is, and they really value that, and they at some point no longer start new initiatives and no longer go out of their comfort zone. And of course not everyone, but many people actually, and even very intelligent people, also people who did PhDs, they when they reach certain age, they stop really challenging themselves with going out of the comfort zone, and which is obviously what you do because you just became a leader of like a big LinkedIn group that is still like 5,000 members and counting, and you have big plans for it, and I really like the fact that you keep on challenging yourself. So my question would be, how to stay forever young, how to keep on challenging yourself, how not to get old after you hit 30.
Oh wow. You are really, oh my God, this is a tough one. I don't even know if that's what it's called. Um, so I'll try to answer this, right? Because I don't even know if I am the right person that you're asking this with. But thank you for thinking like that. So I think the question really is why? Why does because when I go to career panels and people are asking me about, like, how did you get a job, one of the things that I often tell folks is i didn't I didn't get a job. I changed my career 3 times, right? Like I moved from science to consulting to finance to pharma, and these are pivots. These are almost 90-degree, often not really 90-degree, but these are turns. And I did it because I came to a point of I need to do something new. Now, I don't think that is because of attention deficit, but I think it's more about, um, and it's a negative quality also, as I've been told by, you know, different people at different parts of my life, is that after I've done something, I realize that, all right, this is now done. Now what? Like it's like, um I love mystery movies, but some mystery movies, if not made well, you watch them once and you're done. You know the story. You don't want to read it again, right? And so to me, it's kind of that. So certain careers, certain tracks, if you have done it once, you now know the mystery. You have learned it. You know the answer. You can read it over and you can find new answers and you can understand, and that's awesome. Especially when you work with different people, different personalities are different things. So that kind of changes. So now you have to know a new person. But I think that's what it is. Where I oh you know what? Let me take a step back and let me answer this in a much more structured, constructed way. I think there are three reasons why I do this, right? I am, uh, I've now realized, and I'm not being arrogant about it. I am happy about it, but I'm super curious about things. I again could be. I don't. This was before a PhD. This was to a point where I put my finger inside a plug point in India and got like electric shock, like electrocuted, because I was like, what is this? Right? I was told by my parents that I did that very early on. Maybe that's the reason why my brain has completely changed because of that. I don't know. But curiosity is something that I hate when people say that they are no longer curious. When anybody tells me that I know there is nothing more that I need to know in life, it kind of was like, really? Like, have you spoken to anybody outside of your field, right? If you can know everything about one thing, absolutely correct, but that doesn't mean that there are not other things to know. And I like that. It's just like, oh my God, I don't know um, the science of anthropology and things like that. So that's a very big curious thing for me. Like I can't. It never comes to me that I'm done. It's not that doesn't happen, which is a bad thing, right? The second thing, and I will take the joke that you said, right, about Indian people not being lazy. Trust me, enough Indians are lazy, including myself. Trust me on this. And my friends will confirm about that. But the other thing here is there is a context of immigrant mentality, right? Like there is a context of me coming from a different country and a different place and coming here and realizing that, oh my God, now I have so many things that I can do. Can I also do this? Can I? Because remember, back in India, when I did a bachelor's, I could pick 6 courses from 6 courses, meaning I had to take those 6. I didn't get a chance to choose my courses in bachelor's, right? This is something that folks here in the US will never understand because but it's very rigid. But over here, when I come here, I'm like, oh wow, I can do consulting. How can I do consulting? Let me try. And I'm grateful to the mentors. I'm grateful that I put in the hard work to do it. I'm not saying it's easy. It's absolutely tough to make those transitions, but you can do those transitions. So curiosity, uh, opportunity to make those transitions. And then the third part is I'm scared that if I typecast, so curiosity is a good thing, opportunity is a good thing. But the last part of it is that I'm scared that if I just do one thing, then if I do it badly, people will be like, oh my God, like he's bad at his what he does, right? And so this is my way of like avoiding that. It's like, oh, I did this, and then I also did that, and then I did that, and then there is the negative part of it is some people think you haven't gotten enough depth. I disagree. I think the amount of depth you can reach is how much you can retain, how much information you can retain. And after,
Yeah, if I
sorry,
could put one comment here, I think you're a typical generalist, and you cannot really blame generalists for being one, right? So there are people who have like natural preference to go deep in one subject in life and become a world-class specialist in a very narrow discipline, and there are also people who prefer to just try to understand the world and go towards the breadth, as you initially explained.
right,
And I think it's great. And the world is not, I mean, life is not easy for generalists, I think, because the way the job market is structured is that it actually requires
specialization.
specialists.
Yeah.
Um, so it's definitely not easy to start a career, especially as a generalist. But I think it's great to be one eventually, and I think you're a clear example here.
We'll see. One of the books that Vas, who's Novartis' CEO, and one of the better leaders I've seen in recent times, he recently suggested a book called Range by I forget the author. David Epstein is the author, and basically the book talks about how generalists can survive. So that's what I'm reading now. I haven't read enough of it to comment on it, but thank you for asking the question. Makes me feel good that I'm doing something good. But thank you.
Okay, great. And I think also, something that often comes to my mind is that some people just, turn out to be good at something very early on in their careers, often even in high school. So their teachers spot their talent, and then the people are basically put on one track, and then they keep on learning about that one particular thing. But in fact, like the whole job market and the scope of all the possibilities and all the things you might be doing with your life is like a multidimensional like landscape that is very complex. And if you also decide too early on what is your career path and what is your that one thing that you want to be good at, you might also end up in some local minimum of this complex field of potential, I think. So sometimes exploring for longer also results in better outcome, because you might actually end up in your global minimum or maximum, depends how you see it. But what I want to say is that sometimes slow growth and exploring is actually good eventually.
It's like if this is your curve and you are in the upper side and all you can see is that little hump, whereas there is a much bigger hump just a little later. Where are you in that curve is the question, right? And I feel like every obstacle, I mean, if I'm on top of it, then that means that there's a dip coming out. Like I don't know how to explain, but it's you're absolutely right. I agree.
Okay, great. So I think since I don't see any more questions from the audience, and we already spent almost 2 hours talking, which was great. I think it's time to wrap up. So I would like to cordially thank to Parag for joining us and for all your detailed responses to all the questions. And it was wonderful to have you here. So thank you so much again for accepting the invitation. I'm sure this material will be very useful for anyone who watches. And yeah, maybe I can give you one last chance to say goodbye to the audience.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Natalia. I think what you're doing is awesome. My personal conversations with you, I think what your kind of your focus and your narrative and your story, you didn't talk about that too much here, but I think it's really, really beneficial. So if people haven't checked her out, definitely check her website. And if folks have any questions, let me know. Reach out to Natalia, reach out to me. Always happy to help. And thanks a lot, Natalia. This was awesome.